Right, seems like we've got everybody. Good morning and welcome. With us today are Colby Garcia from Prosper Ops and Mac McClinton from 1111. My name is Saad Salim. Today we focus on the one thing that seems to be on every technology leader's mind. Certainly comes up in every conversation we have. Cloud cost. Last couple of years have forced sort of a rapid evolution. The cloud has become more in focus than ever before. Broadcom bought VMware, changed the licensing model. Data center availability, all-time low, under 3%. Gen AI exploded, and with it, so did the data generation. We've generated more data as humanity in the last 2 years than we did in our entire history. And with it, storage. All of this is forcing leaders, business and technology leaders, to reevaluate their hosting strategies. As we at Bridgepointe strategize with customers on their cloud transformation, the number one concern is cost. Let's get into it. What cloud trends, Kobe, Mac, are you guys seeing in as customers move more workloads into the cloud? Is lift and shift really viable?
I can take that one. As far as lift and shift, and like any other answer in the IT space, it's always going to be, it depends, and what you're lifting and shifting into where. That's actually kind of one of the, I would say, positive outcomes of all of the Broadcom madness for the first 6 months of this year, was kind of a recognition of maybe more of a thoughtful approach to what we move into the cloud and why. That's maybe more workload specific. So can it be viable? Possibly. In all likelihood, no. But again, it kind of depends on the cloud target and the source.
Thanks, Mac. And before I turn over to Kobe, do you want to introduce yourself? I think it'll be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Mac McClinton. I'm VP of National Partner Development with 1111 Systems, which, if you're unfamiliar, global VMware hosting cloud company with also some capabilities around network services, especially the tie-ins to the public cloud providers.
Thank you. Kobe?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great to meet everyone. Colby Garcia, Head of Cloud Services Partnerships at Prosper Ops. Bid on us. We are the leaders in rate optimization within the public cloud space. So that's a bit about what we do. Saad, to answer your question, I would totally agree with Mac. It depends. I actually have this shirt that a partner gave to me once. Says lift and shift across it, but it says the second F is silent. It completely depends, right? We have noticed, right? We've been around for about 8 years, so we've seen the maturity of cloud as we pay attention to just the rates, like how much are people spending on usage. Usage of the cloud is becoming more mature. It was lift and shift with a silent F second at first, but people are getting into things like instance scheduling or auto scaling groups. Amazon's made some massive announcements here just this week at reInvent around EKS auto scaling and other things that they're providing. So it's becoming more mature, and it can be more cost effective, but it's not for most people in their first few years of using it. Modernization plays a massive part in it. Rate optimization plays a massive part in it. And most organizations are getting there, but aren't there yet to where it is quote unquote cheaper or more cost efficient.
Interesting. I want to talk about rate optimization versus just optimizing workload. But before we go there, since we started with lift and shift, what about repatriation? We've heard a lot about it. 30% waste in cloud. The numbers just on the waste alone are in the 100 billion to 200 billion a year right now. Mac, what are you guys seeing from a repatriation perspective? We've seen a number of customers move workloads back onto private cloud, hosted private cloud. and
Yeah,
so on. What are you guys seeing?
go back to 2010 when the term cloud first maybe burst onto the scene. I think the U.S. government adopted that strategy, if you will, in 2011. That was really the lift and shift conversation that kind of started to take off. I think the broader market maybe were delayed a few years, and it's those customers probably that are now 3, 5, 10 years into this cloud migration. Again, without the modernization that Colby was talking about, and those are the ones that are repatriating, but not repatriating in that they're giving up on public cloud and its use case, but maybe taking a smarter approach. And I think it might have been closer to 2020 when that cloud first terminology started to change to cloud smart. So actually, again, looking at those workloads and repatriating some of those workloads back to either on-premise infrastructure, or again, we get involved in those conversations a lot because we're running, maybe a more traditional stack with VMware. So, oftentimes organizations will come to us and say, hey, we're really blowing it out with these particular workloads. They're pretty static. We know what they're going to cost. We're looking for maybe a flat rate or a more consistent billing model for X use case. And then we migrate those workloads back into maybe a private cloud or even shared infrastructure with VMrole with more predictable pricing.
Kobe, you guys, just by the nature of what Prosper Ops does and automated rate optimization, do you see, what do you see from your side of the fence, your side of the cloud cost control on customers making decisions of pulling workloads that show up on cloud cost dashboards and then disappear? Because it is people who are entrenched in the cloud, let's say for example AWS, are you seeing them workloads disappear from your dashboards?
Yeah, I think you can see a couple things happening on both the sides of the clients, but also the sides of the big cloud providers when it comes to repatriation, right? The myth that I feel like the majority of the world has debunked is that cloud is less expensive just on its own. Like we said, there's a lot of qualifiers to that. It has to be modernized and it has to be rate optimized. Another myth though is when it comes to repatriation, and specifically when people originally moved to the cloud and did lift and shift, is that cloud providers wanted you to overspend. They want you to move to the cloud. They don't necessarily want you to think that adopting the cloud is crazy expensive. And so I think you've seen a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily call it backpedaling, but maybe upgrading what they provide to make the cloud less expensive. But certainly, I mean, I think Cloud Smart and what Max said is spot on. Just objectively knowing nothing about a person's cloud environment or their needs for their workloads, likely for most companies, the right approach is absolutely utilizing the cloud and also absolutely utilizing on-prem or hybrid, right? Like that's the right environment for the majority of people out there.
Yeah, on-prem seems to have become so much more expensive now, or at least perceptibly more expensive with certainly the license change at the Broadcom VMware thing. Cost of labor hasn't gone down, and in fact, there's a shortage of people. We're seeing the cost of staying the same has risen to a point where people want to get cloud costs right. And because that running infrastructure, doing the CapEx, running infrastructure on-prem or even in a co-location facility, right? You take away the space and power consideration. At one point, the cost of cloud needed to be, in our conversations anyway, 30–40% less than doing it ourselves. Today, I think with the trend we see is it just needs to be the same or better, right? It doesn't have to beat it hands down. So there's more people looking at cloud in a different light, but once you're there, getting it right seems to be it seems to be the number one uh, for the number one priority for leaders who are already there, right? And the number two, and Flexera and everybody else says this too. Number one is concern is cloud costs. Second is moving more to the cloud. So let's talk about rate optimization versus optimizing usage. Like, how do you guys do it? And more importantly, do you have to have it figured all out before you move in? Which one comes first, the usage versus rate?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I think the common wisdom, and to even make this just put it in more simple terms, there are really three ways that you can save in the cloud. There is making your environment, your workloads more efficient, which is usage optimization. That's what your engineers would do on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. There is rate optimization in the sense that Azure, GCP, and AWS all provide discounts for making commitments to them, right? Which helps their 10K and projections. But they give you discounts for your usage, right? Then there's also the contractual piece, which we can kind of separate out from now. The usage and the rate piece, the common wisdom in our industry, which is the FinOps industry, is that you optimize your engineering environment first. It can be true maybe if you're optimizing for things like RDS, where the rate, the discount instrument's very rigid. But by and large, it's kind of a misguided fallacy to think that engineering optimization, I must complete this first before I make any rate commitments. Like you can see where the logic goes, right? Maybe I should have a baseline before I make this commitment to get a discount. But engineering optimization is never done. So by saying that you have to optimize engineering first, you perpetually defer part of your savings. The reason people do this is they think of discounts as rigid, immutable. Once I make this commitment, I'm stuck with it for 1 to 3 years, be it a reservation, a savings plan, a committed use discount, which are the three flavors that you see across all three cloud providers. But the fact is there are methodologies that can make them vertically flexible along with your usage.
You used to have TOps, everything was simple. You threw up servers, you installed the software, and you put an IP address on it. And at some point, people started putting firewalls in front. And then that delved into DevOps. Now you've got the CTO's office involved in IT, IT's involved with development, everybody's sitting in sprint meetings, and then FinOps, right? And really cloud costs have.
Did we lose Son?
I think we did.
Uh-oh.
FinOps. It's and
We got you back, Son?
yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, I got you.
Yes.
Yeah. So Colby, do you want to give us a quick overview of what FinOps is and how cloud costs really force DevOps into FinOps?
Yeah. DevOps is definitely the progenitor for FinOps. FinOps it stands for financial operations. It is kind of a misleading term because financial operations could mean any sort of the business, but it's used in the past 8 years to just refer to cloud cost optimization. It's a super interesting industry. There's this governing body called the FinOps Foundation. If you go to finops.org, that is really like the data and best practice provider for it. Every year they put out a state of FinOps report that'll show you things like essentially what are people that are trying to save on cloud, which is all of us, what are their key priorities? I think the coolest thing to look at within that is the top 3 as of this year. The 2025 report will come out soon. By the way, if you're a cloud practitioner and you want to go vote on that, it's open right now. But the top 3 for 2024 were reducing waste or unused resources, managing commitment-based discounts, which again are the discounts that these cloud providers give you, and then accurate forecasting of spend. And I can't think of 3 harder but more necessary things to do in the cloud. How do I reduce my usage? How do I reduce my waste? And then how do I predict what this is going to look like in the future? But that's what the FinOps industry exists to do, is to help people get a grasp around when we say we need to reduce our cloud costs and make it more efficient. and achieve that nirvana of, okay, that promise of the cloud being cheaper is actually a thing that exists. How do we get there? That's what the FinOps world and realm exists to do, is to actually provide and make that a reality.
And thanks for that. Mac, every time we look at and we look at a lot of cloud spend bills, all sorts of ways, whether it's automated reporting or what have you, the number one cost driver in cloud seems to be storage. It doesn't have to be S3, it could be S3, it could be blob, it could be what.
We might have lost you again, but I think I know where you're going. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'll draw
30-40% of the.
I missed that last part, but I think that to draw a distinction between, we're talking about cloud, public cloud. Again, we run a global VMware based infrastructure as a service in both shared infrastructure and private deployments. And oftentimes when you talk about cloud, people immediately go to like your AWS's, Azure's, GCP's. And then you may pit us against them as competitors. I think where Saad might have been going is, we run our own cloud environment, and some of the reasons why an organization may leverage a VMware-based cloud infrastructure is oftentimes a lot of these usage conversations, like FinOps really isn't part of the conversation so much because it is flat rate billing. There's not a lot of burst or unpredictability. And when you talk about migrating workloads without refactoring, oftentimes that's the use case for VMware, right? If you're moving from VMware environment on premise and you want to leverage some of the flexibility of cloud, but may not be ready to go through that modernization project or process to optimize what AWS or Azure or GCP have to offer, it's often a faster time to value in that you're moving like for like without having to make many changes. But there are many use cases that public cloud gives us. One of them could be scale, geographic options, and as the world of compliance continues to evolve, and you talk about data sovereignty laws, I'm not necessarily going to go build out infrastructure into a country just to accommodate one customer a lot of times, unless they're big enough. And so we've actually partnered with AWS. Some of the lower cost providers out there, and the biggest use case for us, because we're a large in the backup and disaster recovery space, is long-term retention, media libraries, unstructured data. If that needs to be held in a country that we don't operate in, or even in the United States for that matter right now, just because our partnership and commitments with AWS give us quite an advantage, on pricing with an object storage tier where we are kind of doing a service in the market in that we're bundling all the puts, gets, usage charges that really nobody's ever really measured for. So it's hard to account. It's a lot of guessing on the front end. We're trying to make that simpler. So we've done that in partnership with AWS, not necessarily in competition, if that's where you're going, Saad.
Yeah, first of all, can you hear me?
Gotcha.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. It's just the S3 cost. The variability in cloud, how Amazon, Microsoft, Google, maybe even IBM, let's not pick on them, but the variability.
I have no association with IBM, so we can pick on them.
Well, there you go.
I agree.
Hey, I used to work for Siebel. They were our largest customer. So the variability in storage costs, especially with all the things that are associated with it, right? The egress costs, and I know with S3 IO is not as much of an issue, but EBS and stuff it is. If I think cloud storage, object storage in the cloud would be a lot more viable if, and I know you guys are doing something with that, Mac, and take the variability out, take the egress charges, the IO charges, the 4 cents for every input operation. You want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's again kind of sticking with our model. That was one of the requirements, right? We always sold, go back 5, 10, 15 years, we always sold against the AWSs of the world because I could provide a static bill. When you partner with AWS, though, sometimes, especially if it's just a resell environment, you kind of have to follow their rules. In this particular instance, we partnered with them in such a way that I guess we're kind of backing into it, right? The public cloud spend continues to rise, even though I would say it's slowed down. In a sense that you have a lot more focus on what you're moving and why after the whole Broadcom transition, but it's still increasing year over year. So it's not going away. The legacy workloads that are running on VMware today, again, that's going to look very different in 5 years. And our model, probably moves more towards that public cloud and enabling those services. And really, we're backing into it by making, to your point, an object storage available at a flat rate versus um, a unit plus usage, or I guess like transactions, puts, gets, all that, just to simplify it, in the market at a little more competitive price against like a Wasabi or a Backblaze. But, even going further than that, again, kind of enabling that public cloud transition over time and the hybrid deployments, weighing into the networking side, right? With networking partnerships and running our backbone on AWS's backbone. So connected into the public cloud is a big part of our strategy for 25. And it's because, that hybrid story is going to be very prevalent, for the foreseeable future. So we are very well aligned in that community and trying to offset those usage charges as best we can.
Yeah, with AI and what's happened, there's more and more data to be stored that trying to buy, name your flavor of storage on-prem to store petabytes and petabytes of data and then do reporting across it. Like a classic use case for available on-demand infrastructure with storage is not on demand, right? It just stays, and whether it's a compliance regime or it's just business rules, your value of the data is never been more in focus, simply because, hey, what I can, it's not just genetics type company that may be able to find something down the road. Run the same thing, the data today that you didn't find useful may be useful 2 years from now, and it could be the difference between monetization or breakthroughs. And so the data isn't going away, storage isn't going away, storage isn't going to get reduced. And that seems to be, don't know how people tackle it, right? It'd be interesting to hear from customers, and we do this when we talk to different customers, and you guys do this, on how to tackle that storage where the retention essentially is now indefinite and it's never going to shrink. Colby, do you guys see this from, how do you guys do optimization, rate optimization, or is there something to do with the storage side of it?
Yeah, it's kind of all up to what does the cloud provider provide discount instrument wise for, what do they think will make their offering competitive? For S3, there's not, right? So we would look to an 1111 as really the partner to go to for something like that. I do think, like you had mentioned AI in contributing to those costs. There's AI fatigue right now. There's almost like AI critiquing fatigue. So I don't bring this up to just do that. However, GPU instances are becoming super popular. So tied into S3, if you're training a model, this is why NVIDIA stock is through the roof. They're expensive, large instances and usually quite volatile. So it can cause bubble periods of usage increases when training a model. So that's an area we can help. But as far as storage goes, no, I mean, it really is up to the cloud provider on, do they think a discount instrument will help make their storage offering competitive? And so far, none of the three have seen a need to provide usage discounts around it.
We've we've got our first question, and how are we, so, I'm not gonna read it, I'll paraphrase it. How how do we approach customers on optimizing their cloud spend who are not using something like ProsperOps or any of the other tools, right? Mac, you guys have 11 bought SunGard and Island, massive infrastructure provider, especially SunGard at the enterprise level. How are you? What have you found to be effective to broach the subject with customers that are thinking about it?
As far as cost savings with AWS and Azure
Well,
specifically?
yeah, well, it's also it's cost savings, but it's also the migration to the cloud. How do you
Yeah.
talk about customers interconnect into the hybrid story who's run stuff on-prem? And then I'll flip it around. Let's also talk about customers who already did a lift and shift, who've been in the cloud for a while, and now they need to find some savings in order to go invest in other areas that keep coming up. How do you guys do? How do you approach existing customers or potential customers for both the moving to the cloud and optimizing cloud and spend from your perspective? I know how Colby does it.
I'm actually interested too. I mean, Colby, if you've got a, the top 3 bullets for instant cost savings, I'd be curious. My focus is definitely more on the network in those conversations.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I think, and I think the question specifically from Keith was how do we approach existing cloud users and helping reduce costs in the 3 public cloud providers? Like I mentioned earlier, if you remove the contract from it, the enterprise agreement, that kind of overall 3 to 5 year contract that'll give you a bulk discount on cloud services or specific cloud services, and you just focus on, all right, what am I using in the cloud, and then what am I paying for what I'm using, which is usage and rate optimization. The best practice is to do both in tandem. I mean, that's how you get to the place in which we were originally all promised, where cloud for the right use cases is cheaper, right? The way in which you do that is figuring out what's objective and can more or less not be handled by human hands, and what is subjective and definitely requires human hands. On the rate side of the house, you're essentially doing a complicated math problem. You're matching where is my usage at point in time. Let's just make it super simple. EC2 servers, right? Did usage go up or down in this hour, region, family type, generation, all those things. And then from there, how do I match my discount instruments along with that? You can have a team of engineers that try to kind of work around the clock to make sure all your usage is discounted. None of it is on demand. It is in our case, we would posit that that's a waste of people's time, right? You can have engineers focused on what is much more important, which is the subjective side, usage, right? Am I modernizing? Am I upgrading family and instance types, right? Am I making sure that my environment is auto scaled, that I don't have instances on just 24/7 when I only need them for the 10% of like peak times? That is where engineers' time should be focused. And so the quickest way to optimization, again, in our mind, is if you can offload the management of making all of your usage discounted so that your engineers can focus on how do we actually modernize our environment. The two can be done in tandem, and that's essentially what we help customers do. So take the eye off the ball of rate and automate that piece, while putting all eyes on the ball of usage and modernizing that piece.
Well, the engineers probably cost more than any cloud service or infrastructure itself, right? That we, the people, are the most valuable yet most costly resource in any business. And for us, and I think this also is, I'm going to tie this into Keith's question. How do you go to, whether it's within an organization, where when I've managed IT teams and SaaS teams, SaaS delivery teams, I think that I'm going to transition my people's time from what they have been doing, what they know how to do, what they and the way they have done this, whether that's Excel spreadsheets or reports, and then to now focus on service delivery, like, which is most of our cloud services providers do this. Hey, look, focus on delivering value applications, so and things that move the needle, and don't worry about the infrastructure, don't worry about the networking, don't worry about all those things. We will handle that. And that's a conversation that I would think 1111 would have a lot more, and the plethora of all these other, we work with the 8 of the 12 pinnacle partners in the US. There's a value there that of, hey, optimize not just for the rate, but for the people and the spend of the, where our people spend our time, and drive max value out of it. That's not replacing hard drives. That's not replacing DIMMs or looking at CPU utilization on a server. That all of those things can be automated. Let's focus people in delivering value. Right? And I think that's a conversation that's hard for us, both as sellers and strategists, but also as leaders, to go tell our people to, now I'm going to elevate you, and I'm going to change the focus of your job and your day-to-day responsibility. It's similar to VMware. We know this tool. We've managed with this tool for hell over a decade now. And now we have to look at alternatives. That's not an easy lift and shift. But anyways, just what are, I want to stop talking. I want you guys to talk, because you're the panelists. And
Actually, I'm gonna throw in another concept, kind of going back to that question, and
please.
just a simple, what I'll call like a widgety option, right? So I think if we back up, I mean, we're probably just assuming that we're talking about production, but the backup conversation, DR, I mean, that's our specialty. It's what we definitely spend the most time in. But a couple interesting use cases, and Colby mentioned this too earlier, as far as storage costs within all of the public cloud providers. They have not really done a whole lot on the rate side to make it more accessible. And there are new players like a Backblaze or Wasabi in the market that kind of have taken a chunk. One use case when we were first rolling out a partnership with AWS that we ran into that kind of blew my mind was an organization was leveraging Azure just as a backup target. And so to give you an idea, I mean, they had multiple locations with these large storage repositories on-prem, and then they would overflow kind of to what Veeam calls a Cloud Connect repository in Azure. But they had to build out that gateway and all of the Veeam infrastructure to receive that. So they have server infrastructure and storage, and obviously all the bandwidth and the consumption charges. And what that resulted in for about a petabyte worth of data was about 60 grand a month, where we looked at maybe a more modern approach and just saying, well, Veeam, just like every other modern backup solution out there, has some kind of S3 offload capability already built in. Why don't you just tier that off to S3 directly and eliminate all that gateway infrastructure? And the net result was about 20 grand a month for 2 petabytes. So an enormous cost savings just on tweaking the way that they do it. And the question in that conversation, or the question to the end user, is simply, what are you using it for? Like, what is running in Azure or AWS, and why? I mean, that can uncover a lot to get to some of those more transactional, easy wins.
No, thanks for that. And I love it. We've got a product management question, and I'm going to read this one. For people management perspective, would you drive the usage optimization through product owners, or deploy an IT-centric SWAT engineering team to provide recommendations for change?
Ooh, I like that one. People's thoughts on this are going to differ. This is almost like a philosophical question. Do you have decentralized management of essentially financial accountability in the cloud by making things more efficient, or do you have it centralized, which I think is what you're asking by that SWAT team model. And people are pretty divided. The problem with decentralized is typically that if I have different teams that own different parts of the product, they'll make decisions separately and maybe not see the full picture. That's where someone like a FinOps practitioner would come in and try to provide a bridge between all engineering teams as well as finance and IT. But the downside to the centralized is that you might not have as much context when you make a decision, right? So either introduces issues, and we've seen companies do this completely differently, where they've got separate sub accounts for the billing between each of their different engineering silos. We've seen it to where it's all in one environment. When you run into companies that have done mergers and acquisitions, sometimes they haven't even bridged accounts together, right? This gets especially hard when you make it multi-cloud, and now you have spend and resources in all three. I think this is where to be fair, FinOps does have a massive focus, literally called Focus. The acronym is FOCUS, on the tri-cloud reporting. But I think this is honestly where partners come into the fray. I mean, I'll highlight what Mac just said. The fact that they were able to look at S3 cost, right? And S3 has you can employ a tiered cost model, as well as there's different things like Glacier storage, like all of that context and the know-how that a partner would have to help you understand that. It is sometimes helpful to employ a quote unquote SWAT team that is a partner that has actual expertise on how have other clients accomplished this. So again, I say that just as not even something that ProsperOps handles, but as what we've seen as a best practice. Like, find an MSP, a GSI who knows what they're doing in the public clouds and what should live there and what shouldn't, and how it should live there.
Yeah, the whole the SWAT. I'm hesitating when I say this because we're talking about people, and in my experience, every time I've ran an IT team, and I think this is true for all leaders and all people in technology or otherwise, you're limited by the experience that you've already had. You don't have unlimited experience, but even with a team of hundreds of people, you're still limited with the experience of tackling problems, the types of problems and the types of technologies that we've dealt with were a sum total of our prior experience. So bringing in a third party and this happens with us all the time. We're talking to customers who have who are experts in their environment and how they got there in their hosting, but not in general. When you sit across Bridgepoint's like 15,000 customers now, all of those conversations add to our treasure trove of having solved similar problems with different tool sets and different technologies and different people. So the people thing, we as people are limited by our experiences, right? And to get somebody to look at something differently sometimes is offensive. I mean, or it can be taken. It's not meant as offensive, but it can be taken as offensive. So we sort of tend to have to walk a fine line in how somebody did cloud, how somebody did any hosting, and then how are they going to do it in the future to try and unlimit from the things we already knew and the assumptions we've made based on the things we've already learned, and not the things that are out there, which is where we think a lot of the service providers who work with multiple customers would add value. It's just it's not really a technology conversation, is it, Mac? I mean, it seems like it's more of a people conversation.
Oh yeah. I mean, ultimately the most effective approach would depend on the organization's context, culture, goals,
Culture, right? No culture. We people are taken aback every time we're in a conversation, and we're trying to help them identify the right strategy and the right service providers and a mix of. And it's like we ask the culture question, like the culture fit is more important and now with all these costs running rampant, outsourcing isn't something to consider. You're doing it one way or the other. Every organization is doing it to some level. And even in technology, right? There's some level of outsourcing that's happening every day. SaaS, Office 365, you name it. There's some level of outsourcing happening, and to find the culture fit, it seems like more important than the technology fit. I grew up in the Apple versus IBM world. Just to date myself, right? It's OS2 Orp was better at one point, didn't take off. Uh, we tend to latch on to technology in which we find comfort and we're comfortable because of our experience, as opposed to finding the culture fit that may lead us down a different technological path, but a potentially better business outcome. And in order to enact any change, we have to make sure that we're accepting of the change, or at least willing to change. But anyway, um, I want to wrap this up. We're coming up to an hour here shortly. What are some of let's talk about things that we as IT people who have moved to the cloud, hosted private cloud, you name it. What do we get wrong? What do you guys see that we get wrong most of the time?
I mean, I talk to a lot of customers that when you ask, why do you want to go to Azure? And they can't really explain it. I mean,
No,
that
they're
may
in
be the
Office
why.
365. They're getting discounts off of the Azure split.
Right. And that's one example, but we see it all the time where, it may be a higher level, decision that may not be aligned in the organization from a technical standpoint. Again, kind of going back to the cloud first versus cloud smart. If you've picked a cloud provider to do all the things, that's probably wrong. There may not be a single right way to do things, but just picking a cloud provider to do all the things, because someone liked an ad that is sadly, something that we run into quite a bit. So sometimes we have to unwind that, but I definitely understand the organizations when you're trying to open up new conversations and be strategic, and that directive has come down from somewhere that you don't control. That is often the source of many problems for a while.
Yeah. I'll add from our angle what people do in the cloud that I would say is wrong. Metrics matter a lot. How you judge yourself and your performance matters. So if I'm just to stick to the rate side, that's the piece we know best at ProsperOps. People will judge their rate optimization and give themselves a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on really siloed metrics like my utilization or my coverage. To explain those two, utilization is like, if we think back to like phone plans that we all used to have 15, 20 years ago, where you were judged by the minute, utilization would be like, I could be utilizing in my phone plan to its entirety, right? I used all the minutes that I had, but then I used 200 more minutes than that. I'm paying all on demand for that, right? So my utilization is high. I use my whole phone plan, but I'm way overpaying. Conversely, when people just judge by coverage, oh, I'm covered at X%, right? If I use, let's say, 200 minutes and I had 300 minutes of coverage, right? I'm all my minutes were covered. I feel great, but I'm still overpaying because I committed to way more than I actually use, right? So people judge very often with these siloed, simple metrics, and metrics really matter. So the one that we love and are huge proponents of, one of our co-founders created it. It's been adopted by AWS and by the FinOps Foundation, as well as Azure and Google. This is showing up in more of their language, is effective savings rate, which actually blends what's my usage, what's my utilization, how much of my discounts am I using, what's my coverage, how much of my usage is covered by discounts, and then what's the actual blend, like how quality are those discounts, right? Are they 1 year no upfront savings plans? Are they 3 year all upfront? For which, of course, we can all imagine that you get a way better discount for paying a 3 year all upfront discount. So I would say, and that extends far beyond just rate optimization. How do I judge my cloud usage, right? If I'm to like take off the helping people save money hat, like it also comes down to other things like security. That's a huge reason people might move or move away from or move to the cloud, right? So there's other ways in which you can judge your cloud usage outside of what is just the dollar amount cost optimized.
All right, thank you for that. Is there a thing, Mac touched on this, you're looking at costs from a rate perspective. Is there a better, what would make one hyperscale cloud better than the other for a particular business, for a particular company, for a particular?
Yeah. I mean, I'll echo what Max said is that there are circumstances where, like to the example earlier, like having tiered pricing for storage in AWS S3, like that, yes, that's objectively better for that use case. But I mean, by and large, there is no answer, right? Like if you let's just take compute, and I'm going to look at like EC2, Google Compute, and Azure Compute all side by side. There's really not a right answer, and this is where the subjectivity comes in, and this whole conversation we've been having about people is it really depends on what of my people that I employ and what are the partners that we work with know best to where we can best build an environment. I mean, that is what I think makes a cloud better than another is the subjectivity of what do my people know, which again is this is the whole reason why we go back to don't focus on things that partners or automation can do better for you. Like focus on the piece which is quite literally subjective, which cloud to use. In most cases, it's going to be a toss up, and it's going to be up to what do your people know and what do your partners know.
Is it a singular or is it a plural?
I would say plural. I mean, that is like if we were to go by the FinOps textbook, that is the recommendation. But I'd agree with Mac as to what he said earlier. It even has tactical implications, right? If I'm in Google and I'm in AWS and my EDPs or PPAs, which is just your overall contract, comes up for renegotiation, I have leverage there. Whereas if I'm all in one, I might not have a lot of leverage, right? So this is something that I think cloud practitioners need to think a lot about. Some people go for the all-in-one strategy, but I think increasingly you see diversity among the three clouds.
To pick the horses for the courses, pick the clouds for the workload, transform everything into containerize everything, so on and so forth, make it cloud native, and until then, pick all the clouds for the right workloads, and Mac can connect you to all of them. But then, Mac will tell you maybe AWS is the best one.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, Kobe's exactly right. It's the people, what your people actually know. And it's why, in December and January, or last December and this January, you heard a lot of talk about this mass exodus from, VMware because of these cost increases, et cetera, but it hasn't really materialized. And that's why. There's a lot of complexities, and my favorite, right as this all was going down, I talked to a large IT director for a law firm, and his comment was very, very insightful and concise. I'm like, are you looking at any, alternatives? And he's like, kinda. I mean, I did, but at the end of the day, I'm either paying a software tax or I'm paying a people tax, and my software is currently functioning, and I don't know what's on the other side. So I'm just going to stay with what I've got, right, and pay the tax. Either way, you're going to pay for it. So, do you have the resources and people to pull it off? That's going to be the biggest contributing factor.
Yeah. I want to add one thing that we actually saw a couple days ago from AWS, right? When we think about this conversation around VMware, you would think that AWS, who's had a VMware offering, right, which was Amazon Elastic, or sorry, no, the previous one I think was Amazon VMware Cloud on AWS. That's what it was called. You would think that Amazon wouldn't release any new offerings around VMware if that's kind of going by the wayside. And on December 1st, just 4 days ago, they released Elastic VMware Service, right, which is a new cloud service, basically to get your workloads directly on AWS without managing underlying infrastructure, right? So I think that the public clouds recognize what's happening, and that even when massive changes like this happen, people are slow to move, because Mac's exactly right. Like, it's a people conversation. Do I want to get my people on this? And so again, this goes back to, do I have the right partners and people to make the cost efficient decisions? And it's a very subjective conversation.
Yeah, we're seeing exactly the same thing. The easiest path to the cloud is to move VMware to VMware, host it somewhere else, and then do the transformation, because trying to do a transformation and migrate, that's a 5-year process, and it's way more risky. But I want to thank both of you, but I also want to make sure that people, that if there are questions we can answer, and then even if people don't want to ask questions here, if thank you, Brian. Contact information, send us sort of your questions. We'd love to answer them, and if we can help, both from either 1111, Prosper Ops, and all the other tools that we have at our disposal. We help customers all the time, and we'd love to help everybody out there. But to what both of you said, VMware hasn't gone away, isn't going away. You just may not be buying servers on-prem to run everything on your own. And then finding the right mix is a question of strategy, culture, rates, workloads, and workload profiles, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot goes into it, and rather see people deployed and tasked with figuring out what the right workload strategy is, what the right delivery strategy is, versus running hardware 24/7. Colby, Mac, thank you. Mac, we'll probably see you on stage somewhere in Nashville, and Colby will probably see you at the next meeting that's probably starting in 15 minutes. So thank you to both. Thank you to everybody that joined us today. And we'll see you on the next webinar. Thanks, everybody.